Hello, everyone. Hi. Sorry I'm late. Every single time I drive to Wellesley, I don't know what happens. I don't know if it's the traffic lights, but every time I'm about 5 minutes late. So we're going to work on it for the future. But I hope you're good. Happy spring. I think it is finally spring. And today we're going to talk about salamanders, which are actually one of my favorite species of animal because they're just really, really weird. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about them today. But if anyone is new or if you don't remember, my name is Lara Cazo. I'm the adult programs teacher naturalist for the Metro South region of Mass Audubon, which includes the Blue Hills Trailside Museum, Stony Brook Wildlife Sanctuary, and the Blue Hills Trailside Museum is in Milton, Stony Brook Wildlife Sanctuary in Sharon, Moose Hill Wildlife Sanctuary in Norfolk, and the Museum of American Bird Art and Education Center in Canton, which is no longer a museum, but they won't let us change the name. So I kind of do education for adults in all of those regions. My background is I have an undergraduate degree in wildlife biology, and actually that is where I did most of my education on herps. Herpetology is the study of amphibians and reptiles. But I actually have a master's degree in ornithology, so I do study birds. We're not going to be talking about that as much today, but if you have questions, as always, I'm happy to answer. Does anyone have any questions before we jump right into the presentation today? No? Okay. So, salamanders. Salamanders are amphibians, and there are 4 different families that live here in Massachusetts of salamanders. We have regular salamanders, we have lungless salamanders, and we have mud puppies. And then in the same family, but not really, they're kind of the cousins, we have newts. Now, if you have ever gone looking for salamanders, you're likely going to find them underneath logs, in vernal pools, especially during the rainy season, which is kind of right now. It looks like we're supposed to get rain for most of the week, though it was supposed to be raining today, and it isn't right now, but I guess we'll see. These guys are cold-blooded. No, that's wrong. I'm sorry. Fake fact. Some of them are cold-blooded, some of them are not. But for the most part, they spend most of the winter hiding under leaf litter, hibernating throughout the winter before they come up in the spring. Now, these guys always need to be damp. If their skin dries out, they will die. So they're kind of slimy, damp creatures. And a lot of people, I think that they're a little bit gross, but they're actually very, very cool. Now, of the main salamanders that we have the Jefferson salamander, which is this little dude up here. This guy, he's kind of cute. We have the spotted salamander, the marbled salamander, and this is a hybrid salamander between the Jeffersons and the marbled. They make babies, and for some reason they become kind of blue spotted. So that's a great question. They're actually pretty big. They're like this big. Yeah, they're big salamanders. Has anyone ever seen these guys before? A couple people. They're pretty common, and they're quite big salamanders. But you almost never see them because they're really, really good at hiding. Even though they have the yellow spots or the blue or the marbled coloration, they blend in really well with the leaf litter anyway. Yes? Yes, other animals do eat them. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go on, because not all of them, because a lot of these guys are not very good for digestion. Now, salamanders have a pretty standard life cycle, especially compared with most amphibians. They'll start off as an egg, go to larva, larval, still be larval, but get gills. They'll become hatched, And then finally, they'll be in this final development stage where they're, still mostly aquatic before they become an adult salamander. Now, this specific image is, we won't go into it too much, but basically this algae inserts itself into the egg and grows with the salamander. So actually have some of it embedded inside them. It's not really important to the talk we're having today, but this was a very just good image of the life cycle of these guys. And the algae actually goes into the eggs and kind of protects the salamander and helps them with their immune system. But salamanders are just like people, obviously. They have still most organs that we can recognize. They have a heart, they have lungs, they have a stomach, small intestines, they have kidneys, bladder, all the things that we mostly assume animals have, they're going to have. They have a couple things that are unique to them themselves. They have something called a wolfen duck, and they have all sorts of ducts that we don't have. And they don't really have a bone-like structure as much as we do. They do have bones. They have bones, but they're not going to be firm. They're very easily breakable, and they decompose really, really quickly, which means that you're not likely to ever find bones of a salamander. They're very skinny and small. Males and females, pretty much the same as always, except the males have testes and the females have ova. So, spotted salamanders are probably one of the coolest salamanders that we have here in Massachusetts. They are these large salamanders with these bright yellow spots on them, and they're adorable. I mean, look at its little face. So cute. They spend most of their time hiding under leaf litters, logs, and rocks, and they really like swampy areas or ponds but shallow ponds, the vernal pools that only fill up in the spring. And these guys are going to return to the same breeding spot every year. So there are some, and we'll talk about them later, that go to different places, but these guys are going to return to the same place every year. Yes? Oh, what a great question that I don't have off the top of my head. I will get that. Not too long. Some live for much longer than others. But we are going to now quickly watch a short video. It's only a couple minutes that basically is the journey of this spotted salamander from when it comes out for spring and goes to the breeding pool. I could talk about it, but quite frankly, the video does a lot better job and gives you some insight. And let me just, before I play it, double check where the sound is coming. So it should come out the right place. Let's find out.
As night falls.
So kind of crazy. I totally forgot about that part, honestly, myself. Spotted salamanders, a little bit wacky. To answer the question about lifespan, I double checked it online and it's 20 to 30 years. So these guys do live for a decently long amount of time, but there are variation, there's deep variation between how long some of them live. And I'll try to get all those numbers to you as we go through each species. But spotted salamanders, obviously kind of an interesting life cycle. They bury deep underground, then they come out. They do, their breeding rituals before laying eggs. And then often the adults, what that video doesn't talk about is the adults don't necessarily stay in those vernal pools all spring or summer. They'll be in the water, out of the water. They're going to be more along the shores, hiding under logs and such. They spend most of their life alone. They don't necessarily hang out with each other, though you can find multiples under 1 or 2 logs at a time. Now they have bright yellow spots all over their body. This is to indicate, and the question about what predators go after them. Well, they secrete toxins toxic secretions behind the head and the tail, which isn't necessarily going to kill something that eats it, but it is going to be really unpleasant. I never recommend, just don't eat amphibians, guys. It's just like not really a move. So you're not going to want to eat one of these. Definitely most animals are going to avoid it as well. Now, getting back a little bit into talking about that algae, it is believed that these salamanders, and this is mostly theory, we don't have the exact answers to this yet, the algae and the salamanders have a symbiotic relationship. So the salamander's egg sac, so the eggs that the salamanders are in, provides a safe place for the algae to grow. And in return, it helps the immune system of the salamander and actually produces oxygen inside the egg sacs for the salamanders to breathe. So the species of salamander that really associates with this algae is the spotted salamander. And it has actually been discovered that the algae will live inside the cells of the embryos. So they'll actually be inside the cells of this developing salamander. Why? Not exactly entirely sure. There's a lot of questions about this, but it is the first known example of algae living stably inside cells of any vertebrate. Why and how? Don't have a lot of answers for that yet. Yes?
I'm assuming that these are in the water.
Yes. This is all in the water. So all the egg sacs and the eggs are in the water, yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'll show pictures of salamander compared to frog eggs, but you can absolutely, if you go to vernal pools or anywhere that frogs and salamanders laying eggs, you can see the eggs, and you can actually tell frog and salamander eggs apart, which I'll show you a picture of later. Yes?
Can salamanders be used to clean up algae blooms?
No. First of all, they're definitely not gonna eat enough of the algae for that. And mostly they're actually living off small invertebrates, so they're not going to be cleaning up much of anything. They like it dirty, actually. The dirtier, the better. So they're not gonna be very helpful for cleaning anything up. Yes? Well, there still are predators. There are species that will eat them, even if it upsets their stomach. It's kind of like one of those things where a bird of prey or, I don't know, something might eat one and then be like, that was a mistake, and never eat one again. So they're still getting eaten. The other reason is there actually is quite a few of them, but you just never see them. They're not... I don't believe any of the species, unless I mention it specifically, is endangered at the moment. They're probably all threatened. The most harmful thing to any of these amphibians is going to be unclean water. And since most of the water nowadays is not fresh and clean, the runoff just from running through our town into the waterways, the vernal pools, the water is not exactly as clean. On top of that, just general deforestation and loss of habitat is going to be really, really affecting these guys. Any other questions right now? All right. Let's talk a little bit about the marbled salamander, also a big salamander. Most of these guys of the salamanders that have lungs are decently sized. I have held a spotted and a marbled salamander before. So these guys are purely nocturnal, so you're really not going to see them moving at all during the day. The spotted salamander is also migratory nocturnal, but you might see them out during the day. Again, they take, refuge under logs and leaves during the day. And they're really actually encountered when they migrate to breed in September and October. So unlike most salamanders, the marbled salamanders breeds in the autumn. So these guys go to the wetlands before a really good rain in the autumn. And the females will lay 30 to 100 eggs in a depression in the land. So she'll actually lay them on land. She's not going to lay them in the water. This is a really effective way to protect the babies. So the eggs are gonna basically hatch on land and then they'll all come out in the spring. And these guys are really effective predators themselves. So marbled salamanders consume tons and tons of food, generally consisting of insects and terrestrial invertebrates. They love worms, they love spiders, they like slugs, they like centipedes and a variety of other insects. So these guys are your pest control. They'll only eat it if it's alive though. So keeping these guys, which is first of all highly illegal to keep any of these guys as a pet, would be very challenging because they'll only eat any of this if it's alive, and they like variety in their diet. The larvae, even when they're in their larvae stage, are also vicious predators, is what this quote says specifically, vicious predators, eating zooplankton when they hatch and adding more prey as they grow. So they'll even eat fairy shrimp, isopods, and worms, and even other amphibians. So these guys are kind of carnivores as they go through it. This adorable little guy is a carnivore. The larger larvae will even eat caterpillars, and they will consume tons of eggs of other amphibians. Because remember, these guys are coming out first. They're hatching out really early over winter before going to the pond. So everybody else who's laying eggs, that's just snacks for these guys. The Jefferson salamander, he has this funny little nose. I like him quite a bit. Also a larger salamander. He is part of the mole salamander family. Don't know why they're called that. And it's gonna spend most of their lives underground. These guys barely even come up. They do congregate in huge mass during the breeding cycle, so they'll all come together like one night, have a bunch of sex, and then they're gonna go back underground. I love teaching adults, I can say things like that. So in Connecticut, there are pure Jefferson salamanders. The thing with these guys is they're gonna hybridize with these blue salamanders, they're gonna hybridize with the marbled, and they create these like blue spotted looking salamanders. So there's kind of these overlap of both species. These guys are actually called the Jefferson salamander after Jefferson College, because that's where they were discovered. They're really, I've never seen one. They're extremely hard to locate because, like I said, they just spend most of their lives underground. And here's one that it has kind of hybridized with the blue spotted salamander. And you can see here that he has some blue spots and some like goldish coloration. So he's not a pure blue spotted and he's not a pure Jefferson. They hybridized together. Now this picture I haven't shown you guys yet. This is a pure blue spotted salamander. You almost never see these guys because for the most part, these guys have interbred a lot with the Jeffersons salamander, because like that one, these guys are mole salamanders and spend most of their lives underground, kind of like a mole. Now these guys have, ooh, what happened? We just skipped many pages. Let me find, here we go. Yeah, these are all the big ones. All of the salamanders we're talking about can be found in Massachusetts, yes. So basically, these also existed pre-Ice Age. So this salamander has been around for thousands and thousands of years. But then after the Ice Age and after a lot of evolution, they've really started to interbreed with the other salamanders. So they don't exist as much in this pure blue form, but they're beautiful, aren't they? Yeah, they're stunning. I've never seen one. Very pretty. Yes? Mm-hmm. Pretty much anything you can find in Massachusetts, you're going to find in Rhode Island. In fact, I went to URI, and that's where we did. Rhode Island is where I've seen most of these salamanders. It gets a little tricky. You're going to see a lot of these guys also probably in Connecticut. New York and so on. If we go further north, it starts to get colder, so there's not going to be as many of these once we get even like a couple hours into New Hampshire and Vermont, because it just gets colder, and so they can't survive as well up there. But Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York is pretty much going to see all of these guys.
For instance, at Broadmoor, where they have the vernal
Mm-hmm.
set up here, and all that, do the people who work there, do they go and look for these and then do they post that or something? Or say,
So, great question and a tricky question. I don't recommend ever posting an amphibian or a reptile if you find it anywhere. So,
just make me note of it.
yes, that too. Because these guys are highly part of the illegal pet trade. One of the reasons that amphibians and reptiles are highly endangered and going extinct is because they're really high market value on the endangered pet. Oh yeah. Spotted turtles, never post if you ever see a spotted turtle. There are poachers here that will take them and sell them for pets. So in general, we don't tend to mark where we see them. Broadmoor might be like, we saw one in this general area, but even then, I spent a lot of time studying the illegal pet trade, and amphibians and reptiles are so high up there that I don't recommend ever posting where you might find these guys. Just a sad truth, unfortunately. So again, our blue spotted and our Jeffersons, very, very rare to find them in their pure form nowadays. You're mostly going to find them as hybrids of each other. Switching gears, lungless salamanders, these are our tiny guys. These are the ones that you are more likely to see, and the ones that are a little bit smaller and they don't have lungs. So these guys are breathing through their skin a lot like fish. So they're much less terrestrial than our lunged salamanders, our spotted, these blue ones and so on. The lungless ones don't have lungs and need more water coverage because of that. Now we have tons of species here, and I bet you guys have seen the eastern red-backed salamander. If you've ever seen a salamander here in Massachusetts, in all likelihood, it is this guy, the red-backed salamander. There's a couple other very fun ones. So we have the northern dusky, this guy, cutie pie. This is actually the biggest lungless, so this guy's actually pretty decently sized. Then we have the two-lined, which is here. Two lines running down them. The four-toed, this guy, I think. And the northern spring. I might have messed up the name, one or two of these. They all look so similar. The northern spring, right here. Though I think I mixed this up. I think this is the four, and that's the northern spring. We'll find out as we go along. The largest salamander, lungless salamander, we don't have this guy here in Massachusetts, but he's just so beautiful. I want to show you guys a picture. This is the red salamander, and these guys are the biggest and most beautiful lungless salamander in the United States. Some of these guys are fully aquatic, some are not, but they don't have lungs. So how do they breathe? Well, like I said, just like fish, they basically have this very thin layer of skin, and it has to be moist, and the layer is very thin. It's only permeable enough to be able to absorb oxygen and release carbon dioxide. This is called diffusion. All the used up oxygen turns into carbon dioxide, just like it does in our body. It's just not happening in the lungs, it's happening in the veins. And then it leaves the body again, and it takes place the exact same way as the oxygen enters, just through the skin. So there's no lungs, they are just breathing through their skin. Seems a little bit more convenient to me, but I guess we'll never know. And these guys basically have patches near the top of their skin where there's clusters of veins that are closer to the top of their skin than the ones that are deeper inside. And so it's at these points where it's very close, the veins are very close to the skin, that basically there's a conversion where CO2 is going out and oxygen is going in. This image is a little confusing because the oxygen is actually blue. Like the blue blood is supposed to be the one with oxygen, and the carbon dioxide is the red blood kind of going out. So this is basically how these salamanders breathe. Because of this, they need to be much more moist all the time. So if you ever find one, or if you're ever handling a salamander, first of all, if you ever find a salamander, make sure you're not wearing bug spray or sunscreen or even have hand sanitizer on. All of that is going to touch their skin, and that's basically like touching their lungs. So you don't want to have anything on your hands. What the ideal is actually to put some dirt and water on your hands, get them nice and wet, and then handle them. Really, they shouldn't be handled much at all, but, you know, how else do you study and learn about them? Yes? I think they're actually more. They're very squirmy. They can move really quick because they're smaller, and so they can zip a lot quicker than the big ones. They're much better swimmers too. So the most common salamander we have in Massachusetts is the red-backed salamander. These guys are almost entirely land-dwelling. That does not mean that they're not wet. They have to be in damp soil, so pretty damp soil. If you ever touch one, they're not dry to the touch. They're always still wet, but they do spend a good chunk of their time on land. They will go in the water if they particularly need it. And they will go in sometimes to breed, sometimes not. So these guys are able to live more in fragmented patches of land because they don't need to be in a pool of water, which is why they're the most common. So like I said, one of the reasons that we keep losing salamanders is because of deforestation and habitat loss and so on. These guys can live in your backyard, and as long as it's raining frequently enough, they're going to be fine. They do come in two different colors, the red color and the lead-backed color. So even if you find one that's like kind of gray, it's still a red-backed salamander. During wet weather, they will be found near the surface because the under the water in the soil will get actually way too damp, so they'll actually come up because they need to be able to breathe. And these guys actually will travel over certain distances, and you can actually find them often crossing roads at night when it's raining because the asphalt is warm and they're crossing the road while it's raining because it's still damp. So they will move over distances. Here's just another coloration picture of the lead-backed color and the red-back phases of this salamander. And here is I'm not sure if we'll watch this
Auburn Cemetery is known for its lush landscape.
Shh. Sorry, guys.
Auburn Cemetery.
This is a quick video about how important these salamanders are. And the video concept is how these salamanders can save the planet. So we'll watch a little bit of this, maybe not the whole thing.
Known for its lush landscapes, bird watching, and of course, its buried occupants. It's also a place where scientists hope a tiny creature could help cut carbon emissions.
This is probably about 2 years old.
Meet the eastern red-backed salamander. Topping out at 2 to 4 inches long, its size obscures its authority and its voracious appetite.
He's pretty adorable, and it's really funny to think that he's a top-level predator.
Right. Yes, it's like the wolves of the forest floor, I like to call them.
One salamander eats about 20 bugs a day, and ecologist Brooks Mathewson is hoping its population will balance the ecosystem.
And now we're going to go release this and his 6 friends into the woodland, and hopefully they'll start to breed and maintain their own population.
And their taste for bugs could be significant in reducing how much carbon is released into the air.
The trees are absorbing the carbon dioxide, and then when they lose their leaves, those leaves still have a lot of that carbon in them. And we want that carbon to get slowly released back into the soil.
2 to 3 times as much carbon is stored in the soil as in the trees above them. But when bugs and beetles chow down on the leaves at high speed, that carbon is rapidly released into the atmosphere.
So this is sort of mimicking coarse woody debris, so it's mimicking what their habitat would be under a log or rock.
But when you bring the eastern redback salamanders into the picture, they slow the decomposition rate by preying on the bugs.
So we're going to go and we're going to take this salamander and we're just going to release it right by one of the cover boards, and we're going to make notes of where he was released.
These amphibians are crucial in keeping carbon in the soil.
And we'll just lift it up to see if anything is under there now. And there's no salamanders here presently.
No tenants.
No tenants of the cover board. So we will release it right here.
Since the fall of 2017, Mathewson has released about 80 redback.
We're not going to watch the whole thing, but this is just a video I found on YouTube. Can the salamander save the planet? And it's a really interesting concept. It's a good idea. The bugs, just to reiterate what this is talking about, basically the bugs eat the leaves so quickly that the carbon isn't decomposing and sinking into the soil. The bugs are eating it and it's kind of going back up into the air. So to slow down that and make the carbon kind of sink into the ground instead of being released back up, it's to put these salamanders in who will control the bug populations. Will it work? I don't know. But, reintroducing these species into places where they're not could be a good way to do this. Next salamander is the four-toed salamander. Very cute little guy. He obviously does have 4 toes. And these guys are actually one of the more aggressive salamanders that we have. These guys have territories that are no more than tiny little burrows or shelters. But these guys will do defense to protect their homes. They will lift their head high and swing their tail back and forth while secreting a horribly smelling toxin. They can also detach their tails, and their tails will wiggle away in one direction to distract the predators while they shoot back in the other direction. So these guys have some really interesting adaptations that will actually allow them to avoid predators. Other than that, pretty similar from all our other salamanders. These guys need very damp earth, very damp soil, and water to survive. And yes, their tails will grow back, but it does take quite a while. You don't really want to have to lose your tail. The northern two-lined salamander, populations have increased because the dusky salamander is actually decreasing. So these guys have kind of taken over the habitat. Not much to say about these guys, except these guys are somewhat tolerant of urbanization. And they've actually really expanded in southwest Connecticut, while the dusky salamander has decreased its populations pretty significantly. Now, these guys the dusky salamanders are all over North America, and they have really big coloration differences. Some are brown, some are more of this red color. Nope, those are 2 different ones. My bad. So the northern dusky, they can be this color. They can also be a reddish color. They can also be bluish colors. And it's, they're really wide ranging. They can be found from Southern California all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And recently, these guys have actually been broken into 2 different species. So we've determined that it's not just one species, it's 2. Geneticists love to divide species into more than one. So now we have 2 subspecies. And the other one is the northern spring, so looks very similar, slightly different coloration. These guys, again, very similar, active larval stages, which actually last 4 years. So these guys will actually be in their larval stage for 4 years before turning into adults and leaving the water and returning and living their cycle. I know I kind of rushed through these guys, but that's because mostly the only difference is they look a little different behavior-wise. What they eat and how they survive is all very similar. But northern spring salamanders also are pretty cannibalistic. They will eat their own babies and each other if they want to. And these guys are hunted really by water snakes and garter snakes. So these spring salamanders have big predators in snakes. that will eat them. So these guys are not as toxic or even toxic at all compared to the other ones. Okay, moving on to mud puppies. These guys are very cool. Has anyone ever seen a mud puppy? I keep thinking, I often actually go to West Virginia to go what we call herping, which is going on herpetology hunts. So we go look for salamanders, and every year we look for them, and we've never seen one because they're very elusive. These guys are completely aquatic and are gilled throughout life. So basically, this is what the larval stage of most salamanders looks like, but they always are like that through their adult life. And these guys get pretty big. These guys are not small. So we have our lunged salamanders at about this big, our lungless at about this big, and our mud puppies at about a foot. They're pretty big guys. They're the largest member of the genus, and there's also another subspecies of the mud puppy called water dogs, which we're not going to talk about today. All mud puppies and have these bushy external gills, and they sit a laterally compressed tail, so their tail is lateral, 4 toes on the front and hind feet, and just look at the little face. It's so cute. These guys, you might say, oh, it looks like an axolotl, and you're right. Axolotls are mud puppies. But we don't have axolotls, we just have these guys, dinosaur-looking creatures. So they get these permanent deep red gills that are very bushy, very feather-like. So this one is quite young. As they get older, they become very, very feather-like. They're these rusty brown or grayish color with scattered dark spots. Occasionally they'll be like a blue-black color with fine brown speckling, but usually they're like brown with the blue-black speckles. Species range from darker coloration, so out in like Wisconsin, these guys live in lakes and rivers, and they prefer habitat here and elsewhere where there's large flat rocks. They like riparian, so running water, with soft edges, so like shallow edges, running water in the middle, and they'll basically use eroded holes within ledges at the edges of the pond to live in. These guys, every time I use PowerPoint, something goes wrong. These guys are endangered in several states, but my notes have cut off, and I don't know if they're logged as endangered in Massachusetts. I'll have to double check that one. But they're really uncommon. There's only one place that they are logged that you can see them. They might be other places, but like I was saying before, scientists recommend that you don't log where they are. I put this up though just so you guys can get a general idea of, they're really hard to find. They're really only found in one spot, and it's somewhere out by Amherst. I don't know where. Yes? Yeah, so I haven't covered it yet, but they, oops. Come on, PowerPoint. Okay, but they will eat crayfish. They're kind of what I like to refer to as an opportunistic omnivore. If it can fit in their mouth, they're going to eat it. So they'll eat vegetation, they'll eat algae, they'll eat small fish, they'll eat crayfish. If a human toe gets stuck in there, they might eat that too. So they're not very picky. And like I said, they're pretty big. This is the only video I could find, again, because we don't really want to share what these guys are like or where they are too much. So this is just somebody's video that I don't think has any sound, but this is kind of the general habitat. We can see kind of a muddy, gross-ish shoreline. I don't know. Oh, so yes, this is what the video is. He caught one in a fishing trap, and he's going to release it, and we will get to see. These guys don't often get caught in traps. They're usually too smart, but there he is. This is what these guys look like. They're pretty big, and you can see the shallow habitat. They're mostly blind, so they don't have very good vision. And they like these flat rock tops. He kind of looks like he's scratching himself on the algae at the bottom. Very fish-like, but they're not technically fish. You can see those puffed up gills. And they don't come out of the water on their own. If they do, it will be for very short periods of time, but they're essentially fully aquatic salamanders. Thank you. I don't know how long this video goes on for, but whoever this person is that posted this video clearly had a great underwater camera. So we were able to see kind of their life. Obviously, a decent person to throw him back when he got caught in the trap. Moving on to newts, I'm only going to talk about one species of newt, and it is the red-spotted newt. This is the state amphibian of New Hampshire. Massachusetts doesn't have a state amphibian, so we should petition for that one. And like I said, this is the red-spotted newt. And I love to talk about this guy because he's crazy. These guys are crazy little animals. So they are very prevalent throughout Massachusetts, not so much in our area, but these guys are everywhere. My parents have a farm in New Hampshire, right on the border, kind of up by Fitchburg, like right across the border in New Hampshire. And I can't walk around in the woods in the spring without coming across several of these. Has anyone ever seen one before? I always get that answer, and I'm always so surprised because they really are quite literally everywhere in New Hampshire. They're really studied in New Hampshire. There's a huge project to study these guys because they're just crazy, and I'm going to share that with you now. So the newt's life cycle begins like a lot of these other salamander life cycles. The newts lay eggs in the spring. The adults lay these eggs in ponds. Kind of a different breeding cycle. Instead of the little stacked sperm, the males just spray the sperm everywhere and the ladies kind of swim through it. Same concept, right? These olive-colored larvae hatch, and they look a bit like just like tadpoles. You know, you're gonna mix them up with frogs often, but they look a little bit like this. It looks like in this picture, and I've never considered this before, it could have interactions with the algae, just like the spotted salamanders, but don't quote me on that. I'm just making that up from looking at this picture. But perhaps there is some link between that as well. Just like most of our salamanders, these newts have frilly gills and limbs, and they're born in the spring, and they're going to stay in water through the end of the summer or the beginning of the fall, when they're going to leave the water and turn into this. Very different from any of the guys we've looked at so far. First of all, these guys are land-dwelling juveniles. This is not the adult stage. This is the juvenile stage. It's known as a red eft, E-F-T, red efts. The newt's gills disappear, absorbed into the skin. The tail loses its fin-like quality, and the skin basically toughens. It becomes rough textured, and can withstand conditions on land. So these guys are very different from salamanders. Even our land-dwelling salamanders have the soft skin that needs to be damp constantly. These guys basically don't need that. They become this tough little guy. He looks like he could win in a fight, and he can, because they get this bright orange coloration for a very, very good reason. While they are very cute and very fun, they are extremely toxic. This bright color is not a lie. They have a toxin called tetrodotoxin. It interferes with the transmission of signals from nerves to muscles and causes increasing paralysis of muscles for the body, and it will eventually cause paralysis of the heart, give you a heart attack, and you will die. It's nasty. These guys are probably the most toxic thing we have here in Massachusetts. They're so toxic that I think horribly two guys somewhere, not in New England, but somewhere else, because these guys are pretty prevalent throughout North America, dared each other to eat one. Don't know why you do that. And one died, and the other one was hospitalized for weeks. Don't eat them. Don't eat amphibians, guys. They are really toxic just even on the outside of their skin. I have held plenty of these. I wouldn't lick my hand after, though. You don't need your damp hands for this, but again, you don't want to lick your hands after handling one either. I often worry about dogs or cats finding these guys, but it's really extremely unlikely because instinctually most animals know that this is a no-no color. It's a really big sign of toxicity. Moving on from how dangerous they are, these guys will mostly eat insects. They'll also eat snails, and they'll kind of do a lot of wandering around. These guys will actually wander for miles, and not just for 1 year. These guys can stay in this, again, this is the juvenile stage, for 2 to 7 years, and they'll just wander around. They definitely do not return to the same pond that they were born in. Most of them will go to a completely different location. Some might come back. Some might only wander for a year and go back. Most do at least 2 to 7, and most cover hundreds of miles in their lifetime. But when they decide to go back to the water, you'd never recognize them because they turn into this guy. So once they go back to the water, they remorph again. Instead of the bright orange skin, their skin darkens to this olive green color with this yellow stomach. Their tails rebroaden into this flat keel shape and allows them to swim, and they become almost fully aquatic again. So they go from being completely terrestrial to almost completely aquatic. The only reason that they go back to having to live on land and they won't remorph back into that F stage, they can live on land for short periods of time, and that is because if the pond they're in dries up, because it's a vernal pool, they can still survive like under the damp leaves and under like our spotted salamanders. Yes? Tiny. These guys are small. The newts are like maybe 1.5 inches. The adults maybe 2 inches. They're tiny guys. Yeah? Yes, actually they do become less toxic. Don't eat it anyway. But they do lose a good chunk of their toxicity at this time. I don't know if this is still like a death sentence to eat one. I just wouldn't risk it ever. But they do lose their toxicity a bit. At this stage, as can definitely be seen by the color change. They do maintain the little orange spots along the side, though. The adults still have lungs, but they can also breathe through their skin. So they're really weird. They can do all of it. Now these guys, once they're in the adult form, will congregate together, and the males and females will breed, and they'll lay eggs. These eggs will then do the life cycle again. Now, these guys, like I said, they're crazy. And they can live up to around 15 years, 7 of which they can spend on land. Now, this is a very intense cycle chart, and I'm going to explain it as best I can, which is kind of not that great because it's an extremely confusing concept. But basically, I'm going to take this with me. They all start out as the egg, and they all go to the phase 2, which is the larval cycle. Then they have some options. I do not know, and I do not think scientists know why they could potentially go into these different options. My and most biologists' instinct of the reason why is because there just might be habitat boundaries as to why they might want to stay in one stage versus the other. But I don't know for sure. So most of them go from stage 2 to stage 6, and from stage 6 to stage 7, and then back to stage 1. However, some of them can go from stage 2 to stage 3 and live as this basically adult larvae, not have the gills absorbed, and they can maintain this by going to stage 4, where they kind of stay in this larval stage and will develop right to the adult phase without ever going on land. It can happen. My assumption again would be that there'd be some reason that they'd never want to be land dwelling. Perhaps this is like a pond or a lake situation. It also could be that if the population is struggling, it makes more sense to go not to wander out for 7 years and to go straight to an adult and start breeding again. Again, these are all hypotheticals. There's also the ones that go from stage 2 immediately to stage 5, which is another way that you could go from stage 5, which is this weird semi-effed phase. These are aquatic juveniles that can reach sexual maturity as soon as the next breeding season. So these guys, it'd be like 2 breeding seasons. These guys will go straight from this kind of almost F stage, but actually not really, and can go straight to being an adult. Again, my best theory is that this is likely because the populations are struggling, and instead of a 7-year wait till you can have more babies, it's just going to go straight to the next year so they can have more babies. That is a theory. I do not know for sure. Yes?
What happens to the red bits, they go into the air, on the ground? Do they have, you said they did have?
Yeah, so normally what happens is they're an egg, then they are this aquatic stage 2 where they have gills, then they go into this stage where they develop lungs. When they go back into this adult stage, they still have their lungs, but also become a bit like the ability to breathe through their skin. So they're both lungless and lunged newts. This is why they're newts, not salamanders. Okay, we are a little bit almost out of time, but that is our full presentation. This one is a little bit more in depth and detailed. These salamanders are kind of wild creatures, and this is a delighted picture of me holding the red salamander in West Virginia on my 29th birthday trip. This is what I do for my birthday. So thank you. I will take questions now. Thanks so much, guys. Yes. Absolutely. You can. Yeah, it's very unlikely. Frankly, you would hear about it if it happened in the news that a kid got sick from a newt. I've never heard of that happening. Also, just in general, I would hope parents don't want their kids to lick their hands after they handle an amphibian, but you never know. I have always wondered, once my parents' dog got like deathly ill, and I've always wondered if he tried to eat one and spit it out. I've always wondered, but I don't have any proof. But you don't hear about people getting really sick from these guys almost ever. It ends up in the news if it happens. But you can find them, yes. Yeah. Yeah, some of them can climb trees. So they're pretty, yeah. The in case you guys didn't hear, salamander on top of a fridge in a container got onto the floor. First of all, they do have bones and they do have organs. They will also fling themselves off things and live. I don't know. So they're weirdly sturdy when it comes to anything but toxicity, which is ironic since a lot of them are toxic. Yeah. But yeah, definitely they can climb. Some of them climb trees. They're weird. I love them so much. They're so strange. Other questions? Yes. When you say water project, unlikely with a waterfall. So the question is if you have like water projects, water features or something in your backyard, unless it's like a pond or a vernal pool, it's unlikely. Waterfalls, tubs of water, ponds, like handmade small ponds, more frogs. You might get salamanders, but salamanders are very particular, and they're gonna want places that there's not a lot of people, not a lot of things going on, so unlikely to come to your backyard. Maybe the newts, but you need like a big water feature. Yes? Yeah, it's a mud puppy, I believe. It's a type of mud puppy, yeah. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. Any other questions? I did promise to share, you guys are getting the inside into my complicated filing system. A picture of salamander versus frog eggs. I thought it was in this PowerPoint, but I think it's actually in this one. Yeah. So this is a really good image of frog versus salamander eggs. If you're going around and looking in vernal pools, frog eggs here, salamander eggs here. I can hear you going, Laura, they don't look that much difference. There's a really big difference, actually. Each of these is an individual frog egg. These are individual salamander eggs within a giant mass. So frog eggs are individually clustered together, and they're sticking to each other. Salamander eggs are also doing that, but they're also in this large gelatin-like mass that surrounds them. If you're just looking in the water, it's really, really hard to tell because the mass that the salamander eggs are in, when it's in water, it looks invisible. But that really is the difference. You can actually tell individual species eggs apart if you want to. It's really, really hard, though. It kind of has to do with the shape of the eggs, the shape of the embryo, and so on and so on. All right, we're about out of time, but if you have any other questions, please feel free to come up and ask them. Thank you guys so much. I hope you learned something new, and have a good day, guys. Happy spring.